Hello everyone and welcome to the Hockey Hub. So today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the Montreal Canadiens offseason. We're going to be doing this the same style as the other Canadian videos. If you haven't already, watch those so you'll understand how we're going to break this down. We are going to go through it on a step-by-step basis. We're going to start with the draft. We're going to move on to any trades they made, and then their signings, the players they lost, and re-signing their own players. So to start off with the draft, obviously, Montreal had a decisive draft. Caden Gooley at 16, I don't feel like was the best pick at the time. I think Dawson Mercer would have been a better pick, but I don't mind getting Caden Gooley. He does project as a solid, probably second pair defender that does have a little bit of offensive upside with a very solid physical defensive game. And that is the identity that Montreal is building their defense around. A little bit of offense, very solid defense, and a lot of physicality. So Gooley will be a tough defender to play against, and I don't mind the pick at 16, but I feel like there was better ones to be made. Then into the second round, they got Luke Tuck, which that's kind of a typical second round pick. He projects as, at best, a Blake Coleman type. But then the second round pick, and out of all of Montreal's picks that I really like, is getting Jan Mysak in the second round. He was a projected first rounder, and for him to fall to Montreal in the second round, I'm quite happy with, obviously, as a Canadiens fan. Mysak does project as a top six forward with a lot of offensive upside, so getting him in the second round is definitely a steal for Montreal. Even if he doesn't pan out, I mean, it's a second round pick, at least it's not a first. Obviously, seconds do have some value. But it's still a good value pick for a second round pick. Now, we're going to move on to any trades they made. Now, they did make the Jake Allen trade, and once again, that's another move by Montreal I do quite like. Getting Jake Allen, he should finally provide a solid backup to play behind Carey Price. If we have an 82-game schedule, which is unlikely, but still, Allen can play 25 or 30 games. He is one of the best backups in the league for sure, if not the best. His contract is a little heavy, but Montreal did sign him an extension that's actually a pay decrease. And Montreal only gave up a third-round pick to get him and a seventh, but they also got a seventh back in a later year. So ultimately, it was a third for Jake Allen. I really love the trade. It gives Montreal one of the best tandems in the league, and finally Price can probably play better, be more rested, having Allen behind him. And Montreal now finally has a goalie that can, besides Carey Price, that can actually play, give you reliable starts, and win you some games, and hopefully get more than half the points, because that's kind of been the story of Montreal's backups lately. So another trade that Montreal made was getting Joel Edmondson for a fifth-round pick from the Carolina Hurricanes. And this was just the rights to Joel Edmondson. Obviously, if he was already under contract, it probably would have cost Montreal a lot more. So I'm not going to go too much into that right now, because I am going to talk about the Edmondson contract and actually getting Edmondson later. So let's discuss the big trade that Montreal made this offseason, and that was the Domi for Anderson trade. Montreal also threw in a third-round pick. So Max Domi and a third-round pick for Josh Anderson. And to be honest, I'm not a big fan of this trade for Montreal. I get that Anderson is a player that fills a big need for Montreal. He's a big power forward who does have some goal-scoring capability. Obviously, he didn't show that this past season, but he did struggle with injury. So it does fit a big need for Montreal, but what they gave up, I just feel like the value was off. If anything, a third-round pick should have been going to Montreal, not Columbus. Domi had a great first year in Montreal, and in his total career with Montreal, he scored 115 points, which I do believe Anderson is around that point for his entire career. Domi hit that just in 2 seasons with Montreal. Domi was a ghost in the playoffs for Montreal. He was on the fourth line, and in general, he didn't have a good second year at all. Very streaky, and Domi is a risky player. His play away from the puck isn't good at all. He does make not very intelligent decisions as far as his passing, or he takes dumb penalties, whereas I do think Josh Anderson is a bit of a smarter player. He's a more defensively sound player, and Montreal, and Claude Julien, Montreal's coach, really does like that in a player. But I just feel like the value was off, so I'm not a big fan of this trade. I do like getting Anderson, but not for what we gave up. Now moving on to re-signing of the players. Now Montreal did re-sign a lot of key pieces this offseason, but we're going to start with their RFAs that they had to re-sign first. So they re-signed Victor Mete to a one-year deal at less than $1 million. I'm not particularly a Victor Mete fan, but considering it didn't cost them more than $1 million, I believe it was around 700K, 750. It's a solid contract, just for 1 year. They re-signed Jake Evans to a 2-year, 750K deal. I really like that contract. Evans was a solid fourth liner for us in the playoffs. He was solid in the regular season as well. So I do think that is a contract that will help Montreal have a bit of cap flexibility for the next 2 years, because Evans currently does project as the fourth line center. They also re-signed Noah Juleson to a 1-year, 700K deal. Juleson is a big question mark within the Canadiens organization. His health is a big question mark. Nobody knows if he can actually stay healthy. When he can, he's a solid defensive defenseman, but I don't know if he's going to live up to that billing of being a 25th overall pick, a first rounder, and it's not looking like a great pick for Montreal just because of the way injuries have hit him. Then moving on to their bigger extensions, they did re-sign Jake Allen for 2 years at $2,875,000. I think that's a move that was made for the Seattle expansion draft. I think Allen will likely be claimed by Seattle, and they're doing that so that way they have a goaltender to expose. But even if Seattle doesn't claim Jake Allen, then that just means you got 2 more years, or unless they trade him, of one of the best backups in the league, a very reliable goaltender, and it does give Caden Primo more time to develop in the AHL. And I know some Montreal fans want to see him come up and play right away, but the thing is with goaltenders, they do take a while to develop, and you have to give them that time. You got to get those games in the minors and develop them and bring them along slowly. Montreal re-signed one of their best defensemen, Jeff Petrie, to a 4-year, $6.25 million contract extension. I really like this extension for Montreal. Petrie is one of the most underrated defensemen in the league. He's Montreal's best defenseman from an offensive standpoint, and in general, some nights he does play more than Weber, and there is an argument to be made that Petrie is actually Montreal's best defenseman. He's really come into his own in Montreal, and in my opinion, he is a true top-pairing defenseman, and definitely a great top 4 D-man. So I do think that that contract is pretty good for Montreal. Obviously, it might not look great in the 4th year, but that's kind of how long-term contracts go, especially when you're signing a player over the age of 30. But I do think that Petrie can be a reliable defenseman into his mid-30s, and once again, it's a deal that I quite like for Montreal. And then the big contract extension that Montreal gave out was the extension to Brendan Gallagher, the heart and soul of the Montreal Canadiens, likely the future captain, the longest tenured Montreal Canadian aside from Carey Price. So he came in at $6.5 million for 6 years. It is an expensive contract, but for what Gallagher brings, he's absolutely worth it. He's 100% earned it. Gallagher plays his best night in and night out. He can score 30 goals. He's one of the best play drivers in the league and a very solid analytical player. Gallagher is one of Montreal's best forwards, one of their best players, and is a very underrated player. He doesn't get talked about enough as far as likes of some of the best wingers in the league, because his offense isn't up there with some of the best wingers in the league, but his overall play, Gallagher is a very good player, and I think that's a reasonable contract. It is obviously, it's a long-term contract. There is risk with that, but Gallagher, as long as he can keep himself in shape, he should be an effective player and one of Montreal's best for years to come. But now moving on to what Montreal lost this season. So losing Max Domi, obviously, it does hurt them. Now, Montreal viewed Domi as a center, which when you look at Montreal's center depth, that pushes Domi out then. So Domi, the writing was on the wall. He was going to leave Montreal this offseason, and it does hurt because he was one of their more creative offensive players. Not the best goal scorer, but one of the best playmakers, but obviously not a very solid defensive player. Does make some mistakes, and character has been in question with Domi sometimes. So I think losing Domi does hurt Montreal, but not as much as some people may think. They are getting a useful player in Josh Anderson back, but we're just talking about what they actually lost here. And then aside from that, that's really the only notable player that Montreal lost. They did buy out Carl Alzner, but he was a minor leaguer for them. They did let Keith Kincaid walk, which same deal. And then Dale Weiss left, which he was either a healthy scratch or a fourth liner. So Domi is the only notable subtraction for Montreal. And that's part of the reason why I think Montreal had a good offseason. They did get a lot, and they didn't really have to give a lot up. But moving on to what they added. They added Josh Anderson, who I talked about previously. Anderson, if he bounces back, he's at least a 20 goal scorer. He's a big power forward. He's fast. He's got a good defensive presence as well for a forward. So I do like getting that type of player. Now, the contract they gave him is where I have a serious problem. 7 years for a power forward who's struggled with injury and is already 26 is seriously risky and is probably not going to look good at all by the end of the deal, especially when it has a $5.5 million cap hit, making him tied for Montreal's highest paid forward going into this season. Obviously, when Gallagher's contract kicks in, Gallagher will be Montreal's highest paid forward, but for now, it's Anderson and Drouin. And Anderson, he hasn't even played on the team yet, and he's already the highest paid forward. I have some serious questions about that contract. Anderson needs to perform, or that is immediately going to be a regrettable decision for Marc Bergevin. But the other moves they made I don't think are regrettable decisions. We talked about getting Jake Allen, what that means for Montreal, how important that backup role will be for Carey Price, especially in a condensed schedule where it's going to be a lot harder on goaltenders. So it's important to have a good tandem. They got Joel Edmondson as well, and I know there's a lot of divide within the fan base of Montreal about this move, but I personally like it. He's a strong defensive presence. There is a bit of upside with Edmondson. He's big, he's rugged, and he's going to insulate Carey Price better. He's going to make Price's nights easier, and he is a very similar player to Ben Chiarot, and we saw how well that Ben Chiarot performed in Montreal. So I have reason to believe that Joel Edmondson can do the same, and he can play a solid second or potentially third pairing role. I'm not a big fan of the contract they gave him. $3.5 million for 4 years seems a little pricey for what he provides. I would have liked to have seen one less year on that deal, just like with Ben Chiarot's. But it's not too big of a problem. I think Edmondson will be solid, and I will think he will help our blue line out quite a bit. Then there is getting Tyler Toffoli, and the Toffoli acquisition is my favorite of Montreal's offseason. I really like this move for the Montreal Canadiens. They got Tyler Toffoli for 4 years at $4.25 million per year. He's getting a pay decrease from his last contract, which I don't think anybody expected, even with the flat cap. Toffoli should fit in very well with Montreal. He plays Montreal's exact style of game with that good two-way ability, lots of shot generation, and Toffoli can actually put the puck in the back of the net, which has been a problem for Montreal. Toffoli is a good goal scorer. He can get 20 to 25 goals, and maybe in the exact right fit, maybe even 30. We saw he was point per game with Vancouver, so getting out of that very defensive system in LA could really help Toffoli, and maybe we could see a good breakout season from him. So I really like getting Tyler Toffoli from Montreal. He addresses that goal-scoring need, and I'm a big fan of the move. And in general, I think Montreal had a good offseason. They addressed all areas of need. They got a goal scorer. They got a power forward. They improved their defense. They improved their backup goaltending. They got Stanley Cup experience. They re-signed their guys that were coming up next year. And obviously, so there's also Alexander Romanov that could come in as a prospect, and that could be huge for Montreal. I don't think Romanov is going to be an amazing defenseman right off the bat like Quinn Hughes or Cale Makar or even Adam Fox from the Rangers, but I think Romanov could be a solid bottom pairing guy in his first couple years and then eventually mature and come into his own as potentially a top pairing defenseman. The sky seems to be the limit with Romanov. He's got so much potential, and it is going to be exciting to see him play if he does play this year. But he doesn't have to play this year, and that is what I like about the Joel Edmondson addition, is that if Romanov isn't ready, then Edmondson can just play in the top four and Montreal's defense is still fine. They can keep Brett Kulak and all that. Romanov doesn't have to play a big role with the team. He doesn't have to come in and be a star rookie, so there's not as much pressure on him now, which I definitely think is a good thing for a young player playing in Montreal. So overall, I really like Montreal's offseason. I'm not a big fan of what's happened with Josh Anderson, the contract, or what we gave up to get him, but I do still like getting the player, if that makes sense. I think he will fit in well with Montreal. Just it was an overpayment as far as the trade and the contract goes. So that's what I think holds Montreal back for being, quite frankly, an A+ in this offseason. So I'm going to have to give them an A-. They addressed all areas of need. They didn't give up too much. I think they had a solid enough draft, and they do have Montreal fans excited for next year. So, and as a Montreal fan, I am actually excited for this team. This is the best team on paper we've had in a while, and I am excited to see if they can potentially be one of the better teams in Canada. So I'm going to give them an A-, and that does it for today's video. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Bye for now.